Hello, guys. I wanted to get this done last night, but I was sleepy, and after seeing it, I was depressed. So I just needed to catch the sleep, But, last night, I watched the Netflix exclusive Death Note movie that just dropped. And sometimes, when you see a trailer, early on you could tell how a movie's gonna be. And sometimes, usually you want to be right about things. It's good to be right about things. But I really wish I wasn't right about this movie. Because this is quite possibly the worst adaptation of any source material since Fan Four Stick. Possibly even Dragon Ball Evolution. This movie just does not understand the tone of the source material or the archetype of the characters. And I've got 4 pages written out on why. So, let's begin. The script for this film is absolutely horrible. It's corny as hell, and it basically sounds like it was written by Uwe Boll as a Postal movie sequel. The dialogue is just so flat and boring. Now, that said, the casting is almost as bad as the way the characters are written. Light is written as a heroic idiot rather than a sociopathical genius, and let me explain what I mean by that. When Light gets the Death Note in the series, the anime, and the manga, and whatever you want to have it, it becomes a thing that, he works very hard to keep, private, keep it under wraps, because obviously he doesn't want to get caught. And in this, almost as soon as he gets it, after killing maybe 2 people, he's showing it to Mia, who is the Misa Mane character, for whatever reason, and she's, he's just showing it to her, and showing her what it could do, and this is a girl that he's barely talked to, he defended her from a bully once, and, they barely even talked to each other before that. Well, let me continue. Mia, on the other hand, is revealed to be a sociopath without morals, the way Light was supposed to be, instead of her bubbly, love-struck personality, which I'll get to that later. L has been equally dumbed down. In his first appearance, he reveals that he made hundreds of criminals' info public to bait Kira. Now, let me explain something to you. This is derivative of a very important early scene from the source material, in which L comes out publicly in an attempt to bait Kira, but it turns out to be a trap, as he was trying to test the powers of the Death Note and gauge a location of where Kira actually is. And I don't know how well I could explain this whole scene, the original, but it worked, it set a tone, it was genius, and all of that is lost on this scene. L just simply makes the information of just hundreds of people, 400 to be exact, public for Light to be able to find them and kill them. Now, that said, despite him claiming that, he doesn't kill people, he's not a bad guy, he's killed hundreds by this point, either directly or indirectly, considering how you would take that. Now, Nier is a character who's not even in this movie. Nier would do something like that. That's not beyond him. But this is an L. And even in the context of L in this movie, it's not L, because he claims this is something he would not do. Okay? He's then shown to take drug candies, which are supposed to help him maintain his deductive reasoning and sleep, which is fucking stupid. It makes no sense. L always had a sweet tooth, but it never had anything to do with, drugs or whatever, brain performance enhancing drugs. And, his whole sleepless thing was just part of his character type that they just seem to have... I don't know what they're trying to do with that, but it was a fucking pointless detail that does nothing but just distract from everything else. And furthermore, one thing that a lot of people are going to want me to bring up is the casting of L and him being black. Now, I understand why some people would be against that, but being against that casting in particular, really, if you're not against the whole white cast in general, then there's not really a reason to be against that. That said, though, of all characters who should be white, it is fair to say that L would be that character, because his ghost pale skin and dark bags under his eyes are supposed to be representative of his insomniatic habits. In all fairness, though, the actor who portrays him, whose name I forget because I honestly don't have time to care for everybody, he does, vocally, at least for a good while, portray L in a way that I feel like, he gets the tone of his voice right, he gets some of his movements right, but we'll get into the rest of that soon enough. So then, continuing the exploits of making genius characters retarded, L, who normally would never show his face to the public, especially during, the Kira events, is now in this movie making a public appearance. And, he's giving this public address in person, basically revealing himself to the world and to Kira. And, yeah, he's wearing, a face cover, but that's not going to matter soon enough because he ends up not wearing it that much throughout the movie anyways. He's wearing this face cover. He's wearing, he's addressing the public. Dude, that's not going to prevent you from getting caught. That's not a good disguise. It just doesn't make sense. But then it turns out to not fucking matter because everyone's such a goddamn retard that a few scenes later, L confronts Light in a diner and accuses him of being Kira, despite us, the audience, being shown no fucking proof at all that, L should even suspect Light. They don't show any reasoning why he would be suspected. It makes no sense. But you know what? It doesn't even matter because Light makes it painfully obvious that he is Kira. And he's just short of admitting straight up that he's Kira and that you can't catch me. Really, that's what that scene was. So really, even though he's accusing him of something without any evidence to back it up, which he could easily just deny and move on, he just kind of fucking crumbles it and admits it. So the entire cat and mouse fucking, relationship that we see throughout the manga, throughout the anime, throughout every other adaptation... Sorry, phone ran out of space. Now, continuing where I left off, in that one scene, the whole game of cat and mouse that was so brilliantly done in the original, in the source material, in which we see, Light, L knowing at the pit of his heart that Light is Kira, and Kira constantly finding a way to fight off Light's deductive reasonings between two equal geniuses, all that is crushed. That's not, how could it be? How could it continue? But then again, I guess, L, who's supposed to be the biggest genius in the world, can't be the biggest genius in the world when, Light, who would be his one opponent, is an idiot. So I guess they had to be equally dumbed down, in all fairness. Another thing that they fuck up is L goes through multiple, or I guess one very long mental breakdown throughout most of this movie. And that's the complete opposite of L. Aside from, some internal monologue with, with Light, and, a couple, two occasions that I could really think of him, getting scared, L doesn't really show many emotions. He's mostly very, not to the extent that Nier is, but he's mostly very emotionless and very, he's task-minded. He doesn't get caught up in his emotions. And in this movie, he's just freaking out most of the time. And it's granted, the reason they present is a reason you and I would freak out, but that is not L. It's not who he is. And one final thing to conclude all this madness with L is, towards the end of the movie, during the big chase scene, L attempts to shoot Light, only to be knocked out by a butcher with a 2x4, again showing how fucking stupid everyone in this movie is, and, again, going back to the fact that he says, I'm not a killer, that's not what I do, and he even strictly brings up that he doesn't use guns, and I guess this is supposed to be, like, some sort of moment of truth type thing, where, like, his morals are pushed to the edge, but honestly, I don't want to give this movie that much credit, because I don't think it deserves it. So then, move past the characters. This is something I just took note of. Whammy's house makes an appearance in this movie, and I don't really see why. But Whammy's house is shown to be a nightmarish Tim Burton-esque abandoned orphanage, rather than the multi-billion-dollar school for gifted children that it's supposed to be. Granted, Whammy's house is, I think, supposed to be an orphanage, you know, above all else, but it seems to cater towards gifted children like Near and Mello, who don't appear in this movie. Speaking of which, let's take a sidebar on that. There are a ton of characters who don't appear in this movie. Most of the Kira task force aren't in this movie. You know, just L and Light's dad. You know, Near and Mello aren't in this movie, nor should they be, because that's, you know, they don't show up till way later. And honestly, I think it's weird that Misa was in this movie, or Mia, because she had, like, I don't know, she doesn't show up, you know, until way later, or isn't supposed to. But then again, you know, that'd be assuming they were trying to do things right, which they're clearly not. You know, but weirdly enough, like, small-time characters like Ray Pinber, they make time to have Ray Pinber in this movie, and when I say make time, I mean he shows up for, like, 10-second scenes. Like, if you thought he had a short run on the anime, at least he had a fucking, you know, episode or two dedicated to him. He does, there's no purpose for him to be in this movie. He's just there. He's there, and then he's not there. Okay, cool. So, before I continue to put this movie through the ringer, I'd like to bring up some of the good things. The music, while not fitting of the tone of Death Note, there are some unique tracks in here that are worth checking out on YouTube. Honestly, if one thing could have been directly implemented from the anime, it'd be the incredible score by Hideki Taniguchi and... Sorry. This is just... Hold on. And Yoshihisa Hirayano. Sorry. I'm not a native Japanese speaker, so sorry if those didn't come out right. I needed a second. Another good thing this movie does is casting Willem Dafoe as Ryuk. Somehow, despite every other misstep in casting, someone got this choice perfectly right. On the money. Unfortunately, he's barely in this movie, which is a real shame considering how closely he followed Light's every move in the source material. And that really is a shame because, you know, thankfully I could say I was right about one thing, and it's that Willem Dafoe would be the sole good thing about this movie. Now, while I just said there was a couple other good things, you know, that's the main drive. That's the main thing that should make you want to see it. But then again, I think you're better off just finding the clips of Ryuk, because he's not in this movie a lot. I could think of maybe 4 or 5 very short scenes he's in, and while he doesn't do things the same way Ryuk does, you know, in the manga and in the anime, he's arguably more interesting in this. Like, it's almost an improvement. Like, before he was a very much devil's advocate character, stating that he's clearly not on L's or Light's team, but he's just in it for the game. Here, he states that while he's not on Light's team or L's team, he's not on anyone's team, which is also accurate to his character, but he's almost aggressive towards Light and constantly trying to get him to give up the Death Note, and in a very threatening and demanding way. Like, but in a weird way, it's like he's doing it as a game. He's doing it for kicks, which is how he should be. So it's like they took the core personality of Ryuk and pumped it up and made it better. And I guess you have to do that when you're barely in the fucking movie, because people don't know how to make the good things good. and make the good things prevalent throughout most of the movie. Instead, they just want to pile us up a bunch of shit. But you know what? Let's consider Ryuk the corn in this turd. Not bad. One final thing this movie does right is showing some particularly gruesome deaths. Rather than relying solely on heart attacks and car accidents, in one particular scene, a ladder decapitation occurs, which is exactly what it sounds like, and then, a little bit later, we're shown a man stabbing himself in the face repeatedly with a steak knife in the midst of a populated restaurant. And stuff like that's pretty cool. I feel like that's one thing that, I wouldn't say it's a misstep about the original, because there's reasons they did it that way, but when you have a Death Note that you could do seemingly really crazy shit with, and really interesting and entertaining deaths, you should go all out, which they rarely did on the anime and in the manga. So, at least here, they took advantage of that a couple times. Those are really, the only two concrete examples I could think of that, but they're noticeable. One thing I want to say real quick that I didn't have written in my notes, for some reason, this movie has a real dependency on the word fuck. Like, they overuse that word a lot. And I mean, like, I say fuck, you say fuck, I cuss a lot. But in this movie, it almost seems like they're saying fuck so much because they want to appeal to, like, the edgiest teenage crowds. And that's the problem with this movie overall, is it just seems like it was written for edgy teenagers, not adults or even young, people today who know the source material. Anyways, continuing. Back to the bad, the rules of the Death Note seem entirely made up for this movie. For instance, Mia has used the Death Note multiple times and is still unable to see or hear Ryuk for some reason. They also made up a stupid rule that one life can be spared by burning the page that someone's name is written on before the time of death. On top of being a completely made-up nonsensical addition, this becomes the main driving force of the third act. And while not directly related to the rules of the Death Note, I feel now is the perfect time to bring this up. Light uses the Death Note to control Watari in an attempt to dig up info on L. This would mean that, unlike the source material, Watari is his real name, not Quillish Whammy. This, of course, is infinitely stupid in any context because Watari is publicly a close companion to L, which paints a target on himself by default, because Whammy, regardless, knows of, the kind of person L is and the kind of attention that's going to bring. So, and even if L is smart enough to not go by his public name, at least there's that, Whammy should be the same way. Or Watari. It just doesn't work. So, the film climax is during a high school prom in which Mia betrays Light by writing his name in the Death Note, which he needs to find by 12:30 or he dies. The reason she does this is because she considers him weak, and you know what? She's right. Light in this movie has been a fucking pussy. Like, not, and she even says it in those words, stop being such a pussy, So basically, she wants him to find the Death Note and return it to her so she can burn the page, and give it to him. But that's fucking stupid because anyone with half a mind would find the Death Note, rip out the page, which she left in the notebook. She left it in the notebook. She could have taken it out, but she left it in the notebook. And, if he had half a fucking brain, he would find it, and he would burn the page and keep it for himself and kill her. But what the fuck ever. Logic just escapes this movie, which is a real shame because it's just an adaptation of one of the greatest battles of the brains. Very loose adaptation. Regardless, this turns into a four-way chase between the police, L, Light, and Misa, or Mia, I guess. Eventually, the chase leads to a carnival Ferris wheel. Mia and Light ride it to the top, where it proceeds to collapse slowly, seemingly being destroyed by Ryuk. Despite this, Mia and Light begin to get in a petty squabble over who should kill who with the Death Note. As the Ferris wheel crumbles, Mia falls to her death in a scene directly mimicking Gwen Stacy's fall in Amazing Spider-Man 2. Now, if you've never seen Amazing Spider-Man 2, I honestly haven't. I've just seen the fall scene. Please, watch that scene and watch her fall from this movie, and you'll see exactly what I mean. Like, it's all I could think about. It was so fucking jarring and noticeable. While Light plunges into the ocean. So he plunges into the ocean, she falls to the ground. The final scene reveals that Light survived the fall, but was put into a coma. Elle, meanwhile, is shown being kicked from the Kira task force after the chaos and the... Sorry about that, a fucking truck just drove by. Morning traffic. The final scene reveals that Light survived the fall, but was put into a coma. Elle, meanwhile, is shown being kicked from the Kira task force after the chaos in the previous scene. Then, Light wakes up, and... You know what? No. No. I'm not going to spoil the final scene. But just know this. It's actually really good. Like, not even joking. It's so good that I'm convinced it was written by someone entirely different who actually cares about the source material. This jarring juxtaposition absolutely infuriates me. Why? Because it shows that this movie could have actually been good if they wanted to try. So, I can't even give it an A for effort, because they clearly didn't try. The credits roll after a final appearance by Ryuk with his signature laughter as he says his catchphrase, "Humans are so interesting." And then we're treated to a montage of actors in front of the green screen as the credits roll out. And that's the whole movie. You know? So all that said, if you're a fan of Death Note, should you watch this movie? Would I recommend it? Obviously, absolutely not. It was honestly hard to get through. Just, you know, and I know you're probably going to think that's an overreaction, and I'm just being a weeb, and I hate everything if it doesn't follow it directly, and to be fair, guys, I enjoyed the Ghost in the Shell live-action movie. So, I'm not completely biased against things just because they're adaptations, or just because they're American adaptations, or live-action, or whatever. But obviously not. This is a trudge to get through. I found myself, like, it probably took me twice as long as it should have to get through this movie, just because every excuse I could make to take a break from watching this thing, I took it. I'm not gonna lie, I had a very hard time getting through this. Just knowing what I know about the series and, you know, having expectations. It's like, I didn't expect it to be good, but in the back of your mind, you're kind of hoping maybe it will. Should you watch it if you're not a fan of the original? Well, I mean, I guess if you're not a fan, I don't understand why you'd watch it, but that's kind of a contradictory statement, because while it is a very piss-poor adaptation, it does take the core concept. At the very least, I can say that there's a core concept of what Death Note, like, is kind of supposed to be. I'm having a hard time saying that sentence, but somewhere in there was an attempt to adapt Death Note. So if you don't like Death Note and you're not a fan of it, then maybe you'll enjoy this. I don't know. I don't think it's so bad of a movie that you shouldn't, like, that it's like, you know, I actually don't think it's that good of a movie, but, you know, visually, you know, you could tell there's a budget. You could tell, to an extent, there's people who know how to set up a scene and know what they're doing. It just didn't work for the context of this movie or the adaptation. So if you don't care about the source material and you're not familiar with it, then I guess maybe go ahead and watch it and let it speak for yourself. But for the third group of people, if you've not seen Death Note, the anime, or read the manga, or seen this movie, and are interested into doing any of those, where should you start? Start with the anime, I think, personally. The manga could work too, but the anime or the manga. You could start with it, with the live-action one, having no idea or anything going into it, but I think if you're new to the series and you want to get into it, you know, start off the right way with the anime. I think that'd be your best course of action. So, yeah, that's the review for the Death Note movie. It was just as bad as I expected it to be, and in some parts even worse. When you've got laughably bad dialogue, terribly two-dimensional characters who don't even represent in the slightest who they're supposed to be, and just overall, it just seems like it was made by edgy teenagers, you know, more than actual fans of Death Note. So, unfortunately, if I had to review this on Stars, I'm going to have to give it, like, you know, giving it the credit for the few very limited things it does right, I'll give it a 2.5 out of 10. I don't think it's worthy of a full 3, but, you know, maybe it's better than a 2. Honestly, if I have to rate it just strictly on my overall assessment, it's probably going to get a 0 out of 10. But there are a couple enjoyable elements that I will acknowledge, like I said, and those make it at least worth a 2.5. That's still not good. That's really bad. Whew. But, I guess I don't suggest you watch it if you care about the series, unless you're curious to see how horribly it went wrong, the same way I kind of watched it. But, you know, see for yourself. If you're familiar with Death Note, if you've been a fan for a long time, see it for yourself and make your own opinion. Alright, guys. I guess I'll see you next time I see ya. The Power Rangers movie sucks too. Forgot to say anything about that. Never reviewed that one. It was trash. 0 out of 10. Nah, not 0, but it was bad. Okay, see ya.